Today, we will investigate the case of a small child who vanished without a trace after going to the street to meet her father. Detectives began putting together startling clues after her parents contacted the police. The investigation got so confused that it started to look like a TV show about detectives, complete with amazing police work and mind-blowing evidence. When they finally uncovered the truth, it took everyone by surprise. On June 22, 1986, Jessica Knott was born in Altamont Springs, Florida. She was loved by her parents and had a younger sister and an older brother. Her father was a construction worker who frequently traveled for several days, leaving the children with their mother alone. Jessica was a happy, kind child who enjoyed playing with her siblings, hanging out in the great outdoors with friends, and having a great affection for animals. When Jessica was 9 years old, her family made the decision to spend Easter with her grandparents on April 5, 1996. Her mom stayed at their apartment packing for the trip, while her dad went to the store to buy some holiday supplies. Jessica asked her mother if she could go to the yard when she and the other children got back from school. Her dad was supposed to return from the store shortly, and she wanted to wait for him. Her mother agreed and instructed her daughter not to go anywhere else. Tucked away from the main road, their apartment complex was encircled by trees. The mother was reasonably confident in Jessica's safety. Jessica and the other neighborhood children used to play there unsupervised by adults all the time, and nothing ever went wrong. A few hours later, at approximately 6:00 p.m., her father came home and asked his wife where Jessica was. She was taken aback because her daughter was expected to be waiting for her father in the yard, but he insisted that she wasn't. The parents went outside and looked through the whole yard, but they were unable to locate Jessica. Feeling frustrated, they made the decision to ask their neighbors if anyone had seen their daughter. Jessica was spotted in the yard earlier, according to a neighbor. She was sitting on a bench reading a book, but this did not help her worried parents find her. They decided to call the police as night fell and their daughter was still missing. In a matter of minutes, police arrived, began searching, and began questioning neighbors. The police extended the search area to neighboring streets after they were unable to locate Jessica. A few hours later, the police station received an unexpected call. The caller's voice was muffled by background noise, but the operator heard that the missing girl would be found near a water pumping station a few miles from her home. When police arrived on the scene, they were met with a tragic scene. Jessica's corpse was wrapped in a black garbage bag and lying close to the station. Jessica could not have been seen from the road, even though the pumping station was only a few yards away because it was hidden beneath a bridge. There were a few magazines and the kid's mirror next to the body. Police identified Jessica Knott as the victim right away, and they gave the body to the medical examiners. Meanwhile, the detectives concentrated on tracking down the 911 call. The call appeared to have originated from the murderer, and authorities were hopeful that this information would aid in their identification. However, there was a problem. The call was placed from a payphone at a gas station that was less than a mile from the crime scene, and naturally, the perpetrator had already left by the time the police arrived. It was difficult for investigators to locate fingerprints on the phone. There might be more than one print because it was a public payphone. Additionally, the investigators discovered that the perpetrator had probably used gloves or wiped the phone after the call. Experts arrived at the conclusion that the girl was murdered somewhere else and that her body was brought to the water pumping station. Traces found on the ground in front of the building suggested that the murderer had most likely taken the body out of a car, placed it in a garbage bag, and dragged it across the area. Jessica's clothing was intact, with the exception of one shoe, which police could not find in the bag or the surrounding area. The tire track on the ground was the only lead discovered at the crime scene. Police were unsure whether it belonged to the killer's vehicle, but they photographed it and made a cast. Medical examiners examined the body and determined that the victim died of strangulation. It appeared that the murderer used their bare hands to do the killing based on marks on her face and neck. Additionally, a hamburger that was eaten less than an hour before she passed away was discovered in her stomach. Police came to the conclusion that the murderer supplied the food because Jessica's mother claimed she had not given her anything similar that day. Experts discovered no evidence of sexual assault, which completely obscures the perpetrator's motivation. Jessica's parents were initially thought to be suspects by the police. When she vanished, neither of them had a credible alibi. Although the father was allegedly shopping and the mother was packing in the apartment, both of them had the chance to carry out the crime. Police made an effort to figure out how the murderer had taken Jessica from the courtyard of her apartment building without anyone noticing or the girl screaming. They concluded that the victim had probably known the offender for a long time and had left voluntarily. The tone of the killer's voice during the 911 call was another contributing factor. The assassin's voice had sadness and remorse in it, as if they truly regretted killing the victim, even though the experts had worked hard to restore the tape. The murderer's decision to call 911 despite the risk involved said volumes. The offender may have done it for the excitement of playing cops and influencing the investigation, or they may have truly regretted what they did and wanted to find a way to make it feel less bad. Given the caller's obvious sadness, investigators tended to choose option number 2. A curious discovery was made in the trunk of Jessica's father's vehicle when the police examined it. A roll of black garbage bags, identical to the one holding the victim's corpse, was present. However, the man was temporarily ruled out as a suspect and investigators turned their attention to other people when an expert examining the bag from the crime scene quickly determined it differed from those found in the father's car and clearly belonged to a different role. After searching the victim's body and clothing for any clues, forensic specialists found a few leads. A significant amount of dog hair was present. Given that Jessica's family did not own a dog, the murderer most likely owned the animal. On her body, they also discovered human hair that belonged to an unidentified white man. But it took a few days for specialists to extract the DNA profile. Additionally, 2 different kinds of foreign fibers were found on the girl's clothing. Experts deduced from examining their structures that one most likely originated from a car seat cover and the other from a carpet. This provided additional credence to the theory that the victim was killed somewhere else and driven to the water pumping station. Experts tried to identify the breed of the dog hair from Jessica's clothes by utilizing the FBI database, which included microscopic images of hair from different dog breeds. In criminal cases where dog hair may be a crucial piece of evidence, this database has shown to be useful. Experts eliminated breeds one by one by comparing the hair sample with samples from the database. Ultimately, they came to the conclusion that the victim's clothing contained hair belonging to a Sharpie. Such a dog was reportedly owned by the murderer, and the hair from the animal ended up on Jessica's clothing, either at their home or in their car. Investigators believe that Jessica may have been tricked into getting into the killer's car in some way. He took her to McDonald's for a hamburger, then brought her home and murdered her. In the meantime, the professionals tried to improve the call recording, but it was a difficult undertaking. They made the decision to attempt an alternative strategy, so the investigators sent the audio file to NASA and asked for help. NASA possessed sophisticated audio recording removal tools that were initially intended to improve space recordings. They consented to assist and gave the police an audio recording with better quality. To make a match between the voice sample and the call recording, the experts still required a sample of the suspect's speech. They chose to play Jessica's mother the call recording in the hopes that she would be able to identify it, based on the detective's suspicion that the murderer may have known Jessica. When the mother heard it for the first time, she said the voice seemed familiar, but she could not recall whose voice it was. On the second try, though, she was able to identify the voice. She identified the voice as that of their shared complex neighbor. Despite her inability to recall his name, she informed the investigators that he frequently strolled his Sharpie around the yard. The man was quickly recognized by police as James Crow, 35. He and other neighbors were questioned by investigators in the early hours following Jessica's disappearance. He said that when he was walking his dog in the yard, he noticed her. After a brief conversation, he left. After investigating his past, investigators discovered that Crow had no criminal record. He shared a home with his spouse, a nurse, currently unemployed. The man was a former truck driver. He mostly just walked the streets with Pumpkin, a Sharpie. The detectives got a search warrant for his car after realizing that having a dog of a particular breed and having a similar voice were insufficient grounds for an arrest. They found two unsettling hints there. There was an empty Happy Meal bag under the front passenger seat. Given that James was childless and Jessica had a McDonald's hamburger in her belly, this seemed very suspicious. Experts also noted that the vehicle's brand new tires appeared to have been used very little, even though his old tires were not that old and might have lasted for a few more years. Police discovered that Crow replaced them the day Jessica was killed. The police went to this service building after Crow claimed to have left the old tires there, which was highly unusual given that the tires were not even old. Only one tire remained from James's car when they got there. When investigators compared its tread pattern to what they discovered close to the body, they discovered an unexpected discrepancy. They did not match. They were not initially certain, though, that the killer's car was the one that left the tire mark on the ground rather than another vehicle. For instance, this tire mark might have belonged to a maintenance staff member who frequently visited the building. After searching James' apartment, the police discovered a fresh lead. A box with multiple rolls of trash bags that were the same color and size as the ones found on the victim's body was present. Since this was obviously insufficient to be regarded as solid evidence, the investigators had to determine whether there was any way to prove the bags had originated from the same roll. This task looked impossible at first. There were hundreds of manufacturers of these products, and the bags themselves bore no markings or distinguishing characteristics. However, even the detectives were taken aback by their own inventiveness in handling such a difficult case. They got in touch with Noel Roberts, who was in charge of quality control at the business that made the bags that were discovered in the suspect's apartment. Initially, he pinpointed the exact manufacturing facility where the bags were manufactured. The cardboard box holding the rolls had a unique code that revealed the product was manufactured at a Virginia facility. The expert went on to say that since the factory makes bags in a variety of colors, the materials used in their production are always changing, and a small amount of iron or titanium is added to the bag's composition based on their color. The ratio of plastic to titanium or iron varies on a daily basis because it is not necessary to measure such minute amounts with 100% accuracy. To put it another way, specialists could use high-intensity X-rays to measure the elements present in the plastic bags from the crime scene and the suspect's apartment and obtain an extremely accurate ratio. Not only did this analysis show that the proportion of titanium and iron to plastic in both bags was exactly the same, suggesting that they were produced on the same day and ought to be on the same badge, but it went much further than that. A small amount of microscopic debris gets on the machines during the trash bag production process, but this is acceptable according to production standards. But when the plastic sheets are rolled out and later cut into bags, this causes tiny streaks that are visible to the unaided eye. Each roll of fabric has a different pattern due to the large amounts of these streaks on each bag. The pattern of comparable streaks is only maintained for a few hundred feet of fabric at most because the debris particles on the conveyor belt are continually moving, falling off, and being replaced by new ones. This indicates that the two distinct bags were not only created in the same batch, but also within a few hours of one another based on the pattern observed. The lines on the bags from the crime scene and the suspect's apartment match remarkably precisely, according to experts, but that is not all. The experts also clarified that after the bags are made, they are rolled into a bundle by a machine, which frequently produces somewhat uneven rolls. However, these deviations are nearly undetectable, and the rolls appear smooth to the untrained eye. But looking closer at the bag's edges reveals tiny creases and folds that create a pattern just as distinctive as the streaks. When the experts finally compared the bags once more, they discovered that the pattern on the bags from James' apartment and the crime scene were identical. After taking all of this into account, they came to the conclusion that the bag used by the murderer was not only made by the same company, but also fell within a manufacturing range around 17 boxes apart. This meant that the perpetrator almost certainly took the bag from one of the rolls in James' apartment. The two kinds of fibers discovered on Jessica's clothes were also compared by forensic experts to the carpet in the suspect's apartment and the seat covers in his vehicle. Both samples were the same. Ultimately, after comparing a voice sample from James with a 911 call recording, a sound specialist determined that the voices belonged to the same person. Even with the amazing work the experts produced, the detectives had one significant issue. While all of these could be considered circumstantial evidence, they were certain that James was involved and chose to take him into custody. After the man was placed under arrest, the prosecution declared that it would pursue the death penalty. Given Crow's persistent denial of guilt, the case moved forward for trial. The prosecution laid out their version of events leading up to this crime. Because they never missed an opportunity to play with Pumpkin, the neighborhood kids knew James well because he spent a lot of time outside with his dog. They trusted him because of this, and Jessica was no different. The police account states that James saw her by herself on a bench that day while out for a walk with his dog and struck up a conversation. Given that she was familiar with him, Jessica accepted his offer to take her to McDonald's in exchange for a hamburger. He probably took her back to the apartment complex after the restaurant and invited her to come to his house. He might have suggested that she play with Pumpkin. His wife was at work, and the presence of carpet fibers from his living room on Jessica's clothes indicated that she had been there on the day she died. Investigators believe James attempted to assault the girl, but that attempt was unsuccessful. The forensic report states that in addition to strangling the victim with his bare hands, the offender also put his palm against her face. Maybe he panicked and attacked Jessica because she attempted to scream. When the girl died, he put her body in a trash bag so the neighbors would not think anything of it when he took it to his car. He left the body next to a water station after driving a short distance, called 911 from a nearby gas station, and then headed back home. James' attorneys made an effort to refute every piece of evidence during the preliminary hearings, claiming that there was insufficient evidence to prove their client's guilt. Although the judge accepted it, the defense was correct. The burden of proof is substantially higher in cases involving the death penalty, and James had a good chance of avoiding this punishment. Given these circumstances, the suspect was offered a plea agreement. He admitted guilt to second-degree murder and accepted a 40-year prison sentence without the possibility of parole in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. James accepted the deal 2 years after the murder in the summer of 1998. By its terms, he was not obliged to reveal any information about the crime. Nonetheless, he acknowledged that a portion of his choice was to protect Jessica's family and spare them from the trial. The prosecution cited the offender's 911 call, the reason for which was still unknown, as evidence that he genuinely expressed regret. James's sincere desire to lessen his guilt for committing such a horrific crime was the only plausible explanation in this situation. Jessica's parents had hoped for the death penalty, so they were unhappy with the agreement. They also desired the killer's confession, but James said nothing. Nevertheless, he passed away before his term was up. At the age of 49, James passed away in November 2011 from health issues, taking with him the specifics of his deeds and motivations. The work done by experts and detectives on Jessica's case was genuinely exceptional. Even the judge, who had never seen such evidence in his career, was astounded by the quantity of information they were able to obtain by looking through regular trash bags.
A squirrel hunter in Brent, Alabama's Talladega National Forest made a horrifying discovery on November 9, 2015. At approximately 9 a.m., the mutilated and nude body of a woman was tied to a tree. When law enforcement officers got to the scene, they immediately got to work on the investigation. As soon as they started to doubt the victim's identity, Tuscaloosa County sent them a missing persons report for 29-year-old Samantha Payne, who turned out to be the victim. Investigators were soon led in a more unsettling direction by new evidence. Although initially it seemed as though Samantha was a part of a horrific ritual sacrifice. Was she really a ritual victim after all? Or was there a darker tale involving the cunning murderer hiding in plain sight? Today's case takes us to Tuscaloosa County in western Alabama, a significant hub for the state's business, education, and industrial sectors. With 227,000 residents, it is the fifth most populous county in Alabama. Tuscaloosa County is renowned for its picturesque landscape and designated wilderness areas. It is bordered by the Appalachian Mountains and the southern Gulf Coastal Plain. Additionally, the University of Alabama, a prestigious school and a significant employer in the area, is located there. Tuscaloosa County has a fair share of crime, just like the majority of other counties of similar size. However, as of 2023, the crime rate has significantly decreased due to law enforcement efforts. But in the fall of 2015, a pretty graphic murder that shocked the locals in Tuscaloosa County made headlines. On Monday, November 9, 2015, at 9:00 a.m., Jeffrey Elliott, a squirrel hunter, was traveling through the Talladega National Forest south of Tuscaloosa County. He came upon a horrifying scene as he got closer to a thicket of trees close to South Sandy Road. A woman's naked, disfigured, and headless body was bound with barbed wire to a tree. She lay with her head about 14 feet away from the tree. After a distraught Jeffrey called the Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office in a panic, deputies showed up on the scene shortly after. Investigators were taken aback by how violent the crime was. The woman's body was so severely decomposed and looked to have been severely beaten that the authorities realized it would be challenging to identify the victim. The body was brought to the Tuscaloosa County Medical Examiner's office along with the severed head. In an attempt to explain the grisly incident, investigators searched the area. Investigators ruled out the idea that the scene was a cult sacrifice ritual because there were no altars or other markers to indicate the location. The crime scene was searched, but no clues were found. There were no obvious drag marks or tire impressions. Neither identification papers nor personal items were found in the vicinity of the body. Due to a dearth of evidence, investigators had to entertain a different theory. The victim had been attacked elsewhere and then brought to the forest to be executed. The complete absence of forensic evidence baffled investigators, but two unexpected leads surfaced back at the sheriff's office, despite no evidence being found at the crime scene. Investigators learned of a missing persons report for Samantha Payne, a 29-year-old local woman, that same day. Suzanne Payne, her mother, stated that she had not seen her daughter since Friday, October 30, 2015. Although Samantha's photo could not be matched to the decomposed remains from the crime scene, there was a good chance that the victim was the missing woman. If the coroner's report could confirm that Samantha Payne was their victim, then the police would have to rely on it. Dr. Stephen Dunton conducted the victim's autopsy. He found it difficult to pinpoint the victim's identity and the precise cause of death. This was caused by the victim's severe injuries and mistreatment in addition to the decomposed state of the remains. This included 4 broken ribs and multiple lacerations on the skin caused by a sharp object. Her teeth had been extracted, along with her finger and toenails. The most perplexing finding, though, was the absence of her internal organs. Dunton was unable to establish whether the victim's organs were harvested by a murderer or scavenged by untamed animals, but it was clear that this was a homicide based on the manner the body had been tied to a tree and dismembered. DNA was taken from the body by the coroner and sent to be tested on Samantha's relatives. A sheriff's deputy from nearby Hale County called in to report an intriguing piece of information, while Tuscaloosa County investigators awaited a positive identification. Concerned neighbors close to the Talladega National Forest had reported an odd car that had been abandoned along South Sandy Road approximately 10 days prior. The deputy discovered a couple strolling by the side of the road and stopped to talk with them after going to look into the matter. The deputy reported to the police that the two individuals had given their names as Stephen George, 27, and Chili Bruce, 18. The deputy saw that their clothes were stained with blood, despite their claims that they had run out of gas and had to leave their car and walk home. After searching the two, he discovered that they were carrying crystal. The deputy informed the investigators that Chali and Stephen had been taken into custody at the Hale County Jail on charges of drug possession. Stephen and Chili were visited by detectives from the Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office at the Hale County Jail early on November 10, 2010. They both acknowledged that Samantha Payne was a friend of theirs when asked if they knew her. When investigators questioned Stephen and Chili about any information they had regarding the remains found in the forest, they unexpectedly confessed that the body found there was Samantha's. Furthermore, they acknowledged their involvement in the events that preceded her demise. They insisted, though, that they had nothing to do with her death. Rather, they accused Michael David Belcher, a 31-year-old friend of theirs. Investigators were told by Chili that Michael and Samantha were friends after their previous relationship ended. After Samantha threatened to report Michael to the police for stealing her car, Michael made the decision to kill her on Sunday, November 1, 2015. In addition, Chili gave investigators important information when she revealed that Michael was the rightful owner of the car she and Stephen had abandoned close to Talladega National Forest. She said that there was evidence in the car linking him to the murder. Investigators had a starting point with Chili's statement, but her cryptic answer suggested there was more to the story than what she had revealed. Stephen and Chili were taken to the Tuscaloosa Sheriff's County Jail by investigators, where they were charged with capital murder and detained without bond while awaiting additional questioning. The Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office also received Michael's car, which had been impounded in Hale County. Investigators discovered that their suspects were telling the truth after entering the vehicle registration number through the system. It is true that Michael Belcher owned the car. The investigators got ready for a challenging assignment as well. They had to break the news to Samantha's family that their lovely daughter had died horribly. On October 30, 1986, Samantha Christine Payne was born in Dallas County, Alabama. She was raised in a loving family consisting of her sister Katrina, two brothers, Stephen and Jonathan Payne, and her parents, Roy and Suzanne Payne. Samantha's family said she was understanding and forgiving. She had put a lot of effort into her part-time jobs to pay for her college education. She had a reputation for cherishing her friends and giving thoughtful gifts. But Samantha had joined the wrong crowd in her mid-20s and began dabbling with crystal. Samantha's parents had made a concerted effort to assist her in breaking the habit, but she was unable to separate herself from her questionable new group of friends. The distraught parents were questioned by investigators regarding the last day they had seen her alive. Samantha's mother, Suzanne, stated that on October 30, 2015, she had gone to a Halloween party. On that day, Samantha turned 29. She wanted to dress like Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, but she was afraid her friends would make fun of her. Since it was her birthday, Suzanne had consoled her daughter and told her to go enjoy herself. Samantha's parents never thought it would be the last time they would see their daughter as a beaming Samantha left the house. A warrant was issued for Michael Belcher's arrest based on the information that Chili and Stephen provided. Michael was brought in for questioning at the Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office on November 11, 2015, but he was uncooperative right away. Even though he denied knowing Samantha's whereabouts and steadfastly refused to acknowledge his role in the murder, the investigators' investigation was not yet at a standstill. Given that Stephen and Chili had already admitted to seeing Michael kill Samantha, investigators attempted a different approach. They made a plea agreement with Stephen and Chili, offering them a lighter sentence in court in exchange for their testimony against Michael. They both nodded, and the harrowing account of what transpired before Samantha's murder started. Stephen and Chili claimed that they had continued their drug-fueled party with Michael and Samantha on Halloween night well into the next day, well past midnight. Two additional friends, Alyssa Watson, 22, and Marcus George, 34, joined them. All six of them were smoking meth on the evening of November 1, 2015, at Michael's father's motorcycle repair shop. Michael was regarded as their ringleader by the group, who frequently congregated at the store. Stephen proposed to the group that they take Samantha's car when she went to use the restroom. After removing the keys from Samantha's purse, Stephen and the other three men drove off with the vehicle. Samantha did not seem to care about the men's absence when she got back, and she did not even realize her car was missing. The men eventually made their way back and resumed smoking meth. Stephen revealed to Chili and Alyssa that they had taken Samantha's car's battery and catalytic converter before setting it on fire. Samantha did not realize her car was gone until much later, right before they were going to leave. She asked a friend about it, but everyone laughed at her car. Samantha finally threatened to call the police on them as she grew angrier and more impatient. According to Chili, this was the point at which everything began to go wrong. Michael was aware that they would not be able to get Samantha's burned car back, and that if Samantha reported the incident to the police, they would face charges for both meth possession and vehicle theft. Michael then seized Samantha and threw her to the ground. After he repeatedly punched and kicked her until her face was covered in blood, the group loaded her into Michael's car trunk and drove around for hours while Samantha sobbed. However, her night of agony was far from over. After some time, the group reached Michael's residence. Michael gave Samantha the order to undress before they entered. Samantha's humiliation at having to enter the house nude in front of her friends was intolerable. Samantha's feet and wrists were restrained inside the home with a belt, shoelaces, and cable. Again, for hours on end, she was beaten by the group. Samantha's survival was not an option, in Chili's own words. Once more, they placed Samantha in Michael's vehicle's trunk and proceeded to the Talladega National Forest, the site of the ultimate act of this horrifying brutality. While being driven, Samantha had hurt herself trying to get out of the trunk, but the five suspects forced her back in and struck her with sticks until she stopped talking. When they arrived at the forest, they pulled her over to the tree. With the last of her strength, Samantha tried to scratch Michael's face to get away, but they caught her, hit her again, and used barbed wire to tie her to the tree. Samantha had begged them to stop during this terrible ordeal, Chili recalled, and she had promised to forgive them and never tell anyone if they let her go. However, her cruel captors disregarded her cries. Samantha had scratched Michael, so Alyssa and Chili made the decision to use a knife to remove her fingernails and toenails in order to destroy any DNA evidence that might have been gathered under her nails. The woman even took it a step further and used pliers to extract a few of her teeth. Samantha kept telling them she loved and forgives them throughout the entire scenario. After that, the group watched as Michael began to cut Samantha in various places on her body. Samantha eventually ran out of strength after being tortured for hours. At that moment, Michael stabbed Samantha in the neck, severing her throat. The graphic details that Chili and Stephen had provided, as well as the hours of suffering Samantha had gone through, unsettled the investigators. Investigators executed search warrants for Michael's vehicle and residence in an effort to bring her justice. They discovered an automobile battery in Michael's home, exactly as Chili and Stephen had said. They discovered blood-stained women's clothing in Michael's car. DNA testing using samples from Samantha's parents revealed that Samantha's body was the one discovered in the forest. Samantha's blood was also consistent with the blood on Chili and Stephen's clothing, as well as the women's clothes from Michael's car. Alyssa and Marcus, the other two suspects, were also taken into custody on November 13, 2015. Their statements were consistent with those given by Chili and Stephen. Marcus and Alyssa were placed under bond for $60,000 after being accused of first-degree kidnapping. As Stephen had informed investigators, Samantha's burned-out car was discovered beneath the Harrisburg Bridge in Bibb County, Alabama. Equipped with the tangible proof and the admissions from all four suspects in Samantha's homicide, detectives questioned Michael once more. He persisted in denying any involvement, but it soon became evident that there was sufficient evidence for the authorities to imprison him for murder. Then, when Michael allegedly called his mother to ask for advice, she reportedly advised him to be truthful. While he was incarcerated, Michael asked her to take care of his cat. Following his arrest, Michael was accused of capital murder. He was remanded without bond in detention. Investigators and prosecutors were forced to rely on the eyewitness accounts of the four other suspects prior to the case going to trial. Stephen and Chili had already consented to testify against Michael as important eyewitnesses and enter a guilty plea in exchange for a shorter sentence. If given the same plea agreement as Stephen, Michael consented to enter a guilty plea to the murderer. However, the prosecution flatly rejected his request. They desired the harshest penalty Alabama could offer him. Alyssa and Marcus declined the plea offers made by the prosecution, insisting instead on maintaining their innocence. Both were released from jail after paying their bonds. Judge Jim Quinn determined on December 22, 2015, that there was sufficient evidence to hold Michael Belcher, Chili Bruce, and Stephen George in custody while their cases were presented to a grand jury. The judge declared that a grand jury would hear the cases of Marcus George and Alyssa Watson during the same hearing. 18-year-old Chili Bruce entered a guilty plea to the charge of murder on January 15, 2016. She was given a 20-year prison sentence, but as a condition of the plea agreement, she would be eligible for parole in 5 years. She was also mandated to take part in the drug rehabilitation program at the Alabama Therapeutic Education Facility. Alyssa Watson and Marcus George were the first two to go on trial in November 2018. After rejecting the prosecution's plea deals, they both pleaded not guilty and claimed to have left the forest before Samantha's murder, but their gamble failed. Alyssa and Marcus had been involved in the entire situation, according to Chili's testimony. As proof that Alyssa and Marcus had been at the murder scene, the prosecution presented cell phone location data. Alyssa and Marcus were found guilty by the jury of first-degree kidnapping and felony murder. They were all given 30-year prison terms on December 17, 2018, for each of the charges. Later, the Alabama Court of Appeals maintained the 30-year sentence for murder but overturned the first-degree kidnapping conviction. Alyssa was about to give birth to a boy, and Marcus was a young father whose family needed him, so their families begged for forgiveness. While Marcus apologized to Samantha's family and expressed regret for his poor decisions, Alyssa chose not to speak during the trial. But in her address to the jury, Samantha's mother, Suzanne Payne, called Alyssa and Marcus two of the most callous and evil non-human creatures that had ever walked the earth and expressed her hope that they would always be haunted by Samantha's voice, pleading for mercy. Currently serving their sentences, Alyssa and Marcus are expected to be freed in 2048. With great anticipation, the trials for Michael Belcher, Stephen George, and Chili Bruce started in March 2019. Weeks after her arrest, Chili entered a guilty plea, and the jury upheld her 20-year sentence with 5 years of parole eligibility. A few days into the trial, Stephen, like Chili, entered a plea agreement and admitted to killing Samantha. He described in detail how Michael killed Samantha, and his indictment corroborated Chili's. Nonetheless, the jury concluded that he had been heavily involved in Samantha's demise. It was Stephen who proposed car theft and initiated the entire criminal activity. Therefore, the jury found Stephen guilty and gave him a life sentence in prison, even though they had promised him a reduced sentence. Thanks to the plea agreement, he barely avoided the death penalty. Michael Belcher was next in line. The prosecution made their case and portrayed Michael as the gang's ringleader. The prosecution claimed that Michael had already planned to kill Samantha after the three men stole her car, based on the testimony of Chili and Stephen. His drug-induced rage had driven him to kill the young woman so violently out of fear of being discovered. Michael was given a death by lethal injection sentence on April 3, 2019, by Judge Brad Almond, following the jury's recommendation. At the sentencing hearing, Michael expressed his sincere apologies for Samantha's ordeal, saying that words could never fully capture his sorrow and grief. But Suzanne, Samantha's mother, did not think Michael could really feel regret for what he had done. At the age of 26, Chili will be released on probation in late 2023. Michael is incarcerated at home in prison on death row, and Stephen is still there for life. The sorrow of Samantha's passing will always be with her family. After Michael Belcher's trial and sentencing, Suzanne Payne talked to the media about her life without Samantha. She cried as she recalled how unique her daughter was. She was always able to find the good in everything and was quick to smile. It has been said by Samantha's parents that losing their daughter was like having no sun in the summer and no cold in the winter. Since that was also the last time they ever saw their daughter alive, they still mourn her loss every Halloween when it is her birthday. To ensure that Samantha's legacy endures, Suzanne has devoted her life to sharing her story. The risks of putting our trust in individuals who might not be acting in our best interests are brought to light by our case today. Samantha was the kind of person who did not see the negative aspects of people, which made her an easy target, according to what friends and family have said about her. Ultimately, her assassins used her innocence and good nature as leverage to take her life. On the evening of December 23, 1998, a distress call was made to 911 in San Diego, prompting firefighters to rush to La Jolla Scenic Drive. The scene they encountered was nothing short of shocking, a car completely consumed by flames. As the smoke dissipated, a horrifying sight came into view. The charred remains of an individual in the passenger seat. The vehicle, which had Kansas license plates, was registered to a man named David Stevens, a 38-year-old resident of Pacific Beach, San Diego. This grim discovery marked the commencement of a perplexing case. The question arises, who exactly was David Stevens, and what events led to this tragic occurrence along one of San Diego's most picturesque routes? San Diego, California, renowned for its breathtaking beaches, parks, and year-round Mediterranean climate, is also notable for its strong ties to the United States Navy, as well as its prominence in the fields of healthcare and biotechnology. With a population exceeding 1.3 million residents, it stands as the 8th most populous city in the United States and the 2nd most populous in California. San Diego's rich history, dating back to its establishment in 1769, and its diverse population contribute to a distinctive way of life that harmonizes recreational opportunities with a profound appreciation for its past. However, like any major city, San Diego faces its share of challenges, including crime. It is within this context that the cold case of David Allen Stevens, which had remained unsolved for years, was finally resolved in 2023. David Allen Stevens, born on October 23, 1960, in Osmond, Pierce County, Nebraska, led a life that remained somewhat shrouded in mystery, even after his untimely demise. While information about his father, Gerald Lloyd Stevens, is available, details regarding his mother and early years are scarce. Nevertheless, what is known paints a portrait of a man who held a significant position in the corporate world. He served as a marketing manager at Perfect Match, a dating service, a role that likely granted him unique insights into the intricacies of personal relationships. The irony of this is not lost, considering the enigmatic circumstances surrounding his own personal life and tragic end. On December 23, 1998, in San Diego, a sudden explosion disrupted the tranquility of an otherwise ordinary day. The loud boom, reminiscent of a gas explosion, prompted an immediate response from the San Diego Fire Department. Racing to La Jolla Scenic Drive, firefighters were met with the vehicle engulfed in flames. As they battled the blaze, a journalist captured the intense scene, documenting the extinguishing of the fire. However, as the smoke cleared, a chilling discovery emerged. The charred remains of a human body were visible in the passenger seat, marking the beginning of a complex investigation. Further investigation revealed that the car's license plates were registered in Kansas and belonged to a 38-year-old man named David Stevens, who resided in Pacific Beach, San Diego. The mystery deepened as homicide detectives turned their attention to Stevens' apartment, searching for any clues that could shed light on the events leading up to his death. Inside the apartment, they stumbled upon intriguing signs that suggested he was not alone on his final night. In the bedroom's wastebasket, detectives found a discarded contraceptive wrapper and a tube of KY jelly, indicating the presence of sexual activity. Additionally, 2 glasses on the nightstand, one bearing lipstick marks, hinted at the company of a woman. Strands of long, straight black hair, likely belonging to a female, were discovered in the bathroom. The bedroom itself provided even more intriguing clues. Investigator Joseph Cristanziani, one of the homicide investigators from the San Diego Police Department, observed 2 sets of fingerprints on the mirrored headboard of Stevens' bed. The size difference between the 2 sets suggested the involvement of both a man and a woman. The positioning and number of fingerprints indicated that an intimate encounter had recently taken place in the apartment. Armed with these discoveries, detectives began to reconstruct the events of that fateful night. Their focus shifted towards collecting physical evidence, particularly the smaller set of fingerprints and the black hairs, as they pointed towards the involvement of a woman. This crucial piece of evidence indicated that the woman may have been in the company of Stevens shortly before his unfortunate demise. As the investigation into the death of David Allen Stevens progressed, the police focused their efforts on identifying the mysterious woman who could be connected to his final moments. Their search led them to a nearby establishment called Dancers, a topless bar that Stevens was known to frequent. Detective John Teft, one of the investigators from the San Diego Police Department assigned to the case, visited the club and shared Stevens' pictures with the dancers and staff. Regrettably, none of the fingerprints obtained from the dancers matched those found in his bedroom, leaving the police without any solid leads regarding the woman's identity. In an attempt to uncover new information, Detective John R. Young, another dedicated detective from the San Diego Police Department, decided to explore a different approach. He delved into Stevens' personal belongings, specifically his address book. During Young's interview with her, the woman described her relationship with Stevens as casually friendly. Hoping that this new lead would yield results, her fingerprints were compared to those found in the apartment. Once again, there was no match. 4 months had passed since Stevens was tragically discovered in his car, and with no new leads or matches, the case gradually grew cold. For over 2 years, the mysterious death of David Allen Stevens remained dormant in the cold case files, with no significant breakthroughs or promising leads. Then, in a stroke of strategic thinking, the San Diego homicide detectives decided to capitalize on a major event, Super Bowl 35, which took place on January 28, 2001, featuring the Baltimore Ravens and the New York Giants. With a large television audience anticipated, the detectives saw an opportunity and ran a Crime Stopper spot during the game, displaying David Stevens' picture and appealing for public assistance. The following day marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. An anonymous female called in with potentially crucial information. The caller directed detectives towards a suspect, the same dancer who had previously asserted that she and David Stevens were merely friends. Despite the fact that her DNA and fingerprints did not match the evidence at the crime scene, detectives could not disregard this new lead. They believed it was more than a mere coincidence. Over the next 6 months, detectives tirelessly pursued the angle of the dance club, hoping to uncover solid evidence. Despite their diligent efforts, they continuously came up empty-handed, unable to definitively connect anyone to the crime. However, in November of 2001, the homicide team received another significant call. The caller was Nye Norn, a 21-year-old woman who claimed to possess vital information regarding David Stevens' murder. Norn disclosed that Stevens had been her supervisor and lover at Perfect Match. She held a crucial piece of information: the name of the man responsible for Stevens' death, Ronald Barker, who was 35 years old at the time of the murder. This revelation injected new life into the case, providing detectives with a solid lead to pursue. With this newfound information, the investigation gained momentum as detectives sought to unravel the connection between Nye Norn, Ronald Barker, and the tragic fate of David Allen Stevens. Ronald Barker, born in 1963, and Nye Norn, born in 1980, emerged as the central figures in the tragic case of David Allen Stevens. Barker's early life and family background remain largely unknown, concealed in the shadows of his later actions. On the other hand, Norn's life was marked by hardship from the very beginning. Born in a Thai refugee camp after her mother escaped the horrors in Cambodia, she arrived in the United States at the age of 5. initially settling in Florida before moving to San Diego. There, Noreen's life was further tainted by domestic turmoil, as her stepfather's abusive behavior created a tense home environment. Noreen worked as a telemarketer at Perfect Match, where she crossed paths with David Stevens. It was at that location where she also encountered Barker, whom she found through an online platform and entered into a passionate relationship with, despite him being a married 35-year-old man and her being only 18. While Noreen's relationship with Stevens progressed from casual workplace flirting to planning their first date, her affair with Barker continued in the background. However, Noreen became increasingly dissatisfied with Barker. On the same night that Stevens was killed, Noreen had previously left his apartment at 3:00 a.m. When she returned home, she found Barker waiting for her in a jealous rage. In an attempt to conceal her infidelity, she falsely told Barker that her encounter with Stevens was non-consensual. Later, Noreen confessed to the police that Barker, consumed by jealousy, shot and killed Stevens before setting his car on fire. She claimed to have been present during the murder but unable to stop Barker. Noreen portrayed herself as another victim of Barker's anger, implicating him as the possessive boyfriend who carried out the murder. To support her account, Noreen agreed to a police request to call Barker and discuss the incident while the conversation was recorded. This tactic aimed to move beyond a he-said-she-said situation, hoping to obtain an admission or any detail that could strengthen the case. The investigation uncovered a complex and intricate plot. Barker admitted to following Stevens, pretending that Noreen's car had broken down. When Barker signaled with his lights, Noreen deceived Stevens by claiming it was her brother coming to assist. Unaware of the impending danger, Stevens allowed Barker into the back seat of his car, where Barker shot him twice in the head. Barker confessed to setting the car on fire to eliminate evidence and even displayed burns he sustained during the act. For nearly 3 years, the two kept their atrocious crime hidden, bound by their shared secrecy. However, as the case unraveled, it became evident that both Barker and Noreen were deeply entangled in a web of lies and deceit, ultimately leading to the tragic demise of David Alan Stevens. In November 2001, a significant turn of events unfolded when detectives apprehended Ronald Barker for first-degree murder. Shortly after, Noreen was also arrested and faced the same charge. Barker's trial occurred in January 2003 in a San Diego courtroom, where he opted to represent himself. Despite his efforts to challenge the evidence, the jury swiftly found him guilty after just 2 hours of deliberation. Barker was sentenced to life in prison on January 27, 2003. Noreen's trial followed a similar path, resulting in her conviction for first-degree murder and a life sentence. However, Noreen's case took a different turn as she appealed her conviction based on battered woman syndrome. This appeal led to a reduced sentence of 15 years, which began in 2003. Noreen was released in 2017 after serving 14 years in prison, marking the conclusion of a complex chapter in San Diego's criminal justice system. The resolution of David Alan Stevens' case finally brought closure to this family, offering them a sense of finality and justice after enduring a long and challenging process.